Hi everyone again. So welcome to our next session, which we're calling Workshop for Building Powerful Political Narratives. Thanks for staying around. Maybe we'll get a bit warmer. Hopefully our stimulating discussions will get us our brains going as well. So the title, it may seem a bit big, maybe vague at the moment. Hopefully it will get a bit cleared up later on. So to start, I'm Molly, for those of you who haven't met before. I'm chair of the Wire. The Young Fabian's comms network. As I've said to a couple of people in the break, we're a very, very small network. So at the end, I'll explain how to get involved. Please do. We're a fun crowd. It's literally Laura and I and a few other people. But yeah, and this is Guy, who is representing Labour Doorstep.
Yes. Yeah. I'm vice chair of the organisation, run it alongside Paddy, who you all know, but I'm relatively new face to the Young Fabian, so it's great to be here today.
Cool. We will have a chance to introduce ourselves a little bit more afterwards, but first I wanted to give you a context of the workshop. So you just had a class session earlier from Linda and Laura. That was brilliant. I really like that, explaining kind of the strands and types of jobs in it. So that, if we're thinking of the structure of the day, is kind of the what of comms. In this, I want us to explore the why and then go into the how we go about doing it. So that's the big way of seeing it. Hopefully it will work out, so bear with on this one. So why we communicate, why it's important for us to have days like this or continue talking about communications and taking it seriously, and then ultimately why networks like ours and Labour in Comms and people like that exist. So a spoiler, I will always keep saying this, that comms is central to anything in life, but in politics specifically. It's all well and nice, projects happening, laws being changed, brilliant things happening, but people want to shout about it and shout about it effectively. It loses impact and reach, among other things. So in this session I'm also trying to model kind of a taster session to what the comms network is trying to be, which is a place of discussion, of upskilling in comms, of more of a chill place. Comms is a reactive place to work, quite fun, and so we're trying to model that. So in the second half, after hearing, going into a little bit of theory and hearing a case study, we'll go into a workshop-y way of working where at the end of this workshop, I want us to understand the why of comms, and then we get on board with the how, so how we communicate effectively, how we build narratives, and how, most importantly, us as a group of young people in politics in this room can do this, regardless of our background and our training. And then maybe even how we can sort out Labour winning in 2024. So it's not too much to ask on a Saturday afternoon, but I feel we can get there. So that's a little agenda for us, but we'll get into that. So firstly, just who we are. So as I said, I'm Molly. I mentioned to a couple of people I joined the YF, so Young Fabians just a year ago. I was immediately sworn in as Comms Network co-chair with my co-chair. As I said, tiny networks. That kind of shows the small interest, but also understanding of comms there is in general. The why networks like economics network and things like that have, the themes networks have bigger membership, whereas because we kind of filter everywhere, are smaller. But all good. We get about. In my day-to-day, I work for NHS England as a project and comms officer. In a little part of leadership of personalised care. If anyone has any idea about the NHS, it's part of the long-term plan and the strategy going forward about making care more community-based and things like that. So I touch on a lot of stakeholder engagement, content creation, digital, social media. I like to dabble around. And so prior to that, my background was in charities. So my life, and I say, anyone's heard of them? They're a really cool youth advocacy group. They work on bringing young people's voices into politics and getting people from all backgrounds and all the politics. They actually have an event today, so you're saying people giving their lives to politics, that's the other option for today, but happy you guys are doing that. So that was kind of a thing in uni of getting involved, being at the right place, right time. We've got to work with APPGs on the beautiful subject of Brexit, which aim was to get young people's voices in Brexit. Did we do it? No, but and then Students' Union was around the election time, 2019 election, getting young people in uni and stuff registered, on board, getting hosting events, blah blah blah. So not so unlike Laura or the people, not got a very comedy background per se, but more makeshift, touch a load of places and end up in comms. My point being, it's for everyone, and you can get there, and you'll eventually, if that's something you want to do, it's you somehow end up in NHS England doing it for them. So here we are. So yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'm not that impressed. I just have the one logo. It's a very nice logo. So I do enable Doorstep with Fanny as chair, and I'm vice chair, and we put this organisation together to.
Yeah, a little bit. So we see.
We put this organisation together to try and bring grassroots. Don't want to miss this
I started off
concept.
reading Fabian Wednesday.
Andrew.
Alright. Yes, so we put this organisation together, me, Paddy and a couple of others, to bring together grassroots activists. Andrew as well, part of the Doorstep, put together this organisation where labour activists across the country can share their ideas and their ideals, but also that we can put events on, door-knocking events. The problem is we founded it a couple of weeks before restrictions came into place, so you make an organisation wholly based on knocking on people's doors when the pandemic comes around. So it wasn't particularly good, but we took it to a new level, looked into graphic design and various other stuff, and then in my personal capacity, I just got a job with the Labour Party at the start of the month, working as an electoral organiser in Stevenage Labour, in Pascoe in the Hertfordshire Labour, and Stevenage is a national target seat, so lots of good work going on there. Yeah, that's
Awesome. Cool. So, yeah. So you've heard about us. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to hear more about you guys. So we're going for quick 5 questions, hands up, 5s. So, so who in this room would say they work in comms in their daily job? Cool. Who would say they work in comms outside of their daily job, so in volunteering? Okay. Who maybe doesn't work in it but has dabbled, or would say they have done a bit of comms? Right. And who before today would say they potentially have no clue what comms was? Okay. That's positive. We are mostly comms connoisseurs, but a good spread of people who do work across the sectors. Who is kind of in-house corporate? What's the word? PR type thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm in-house, yeah.
We got an agency.
Yeah, agency. That's right.
Oh.
Agency.
Oh, not
Cool.
agency.
Who maybe other governmental potentially? What other type of comms do we have in the room?
I was government, but I'm self-employed now.
Brilliant. Anything like that?
Communications officer for an MP.
Oh, cool.
What Rita Hart.
I like she used to be my MP. Great.
Oh really?
Yeah.
And she's Connie Cox's sister.
Yeah.
From Blue Pizza.
I never knew that. Sorry.
No, she is, yeah.
Sorry, Scarell.
That makes sense. Honey.
Yeah, so I work in-house and I also have a freelance business on the side. So, yeah.
So, good spread. Happy to hear that no one said they don't have a clue. We did say that. We're going to try and change that, but we're good, so we have a solid basis. But yeah, so the aim is to kind of, there's the classic slogan, like, if you don't do politics, politics will do you. I feel like comms is very much the same. If you don't create your own narrative, it can be very much created for you. So yeah, so we as a group of leaders have a massive part to play in comms and building this narrative going forward on the left and, to be fair, in any organisation you go in. So what we'd like to go over today is how you do that, and we'll also, in the presentation afterwards, talk about specific side of future of comms. So yeah. So beforehand, that's kind of some spoilers. Beforehand, I want to go into the why. So why is communications important in policy? I'm throwing that out there. This is a very vague question, but we'll does anyone want to speak to that?
Because if you don't have a clear narrative around it, it can be misunderstood, and people might not understand what the policy is actually trying to do, and then you can't enact change.
Absolutely.
Obviously, usually involves someone else changing their behaviour if they don't know about it.
Clarity is one of the main things that I struggle with in terms of Labour politics specifically. Anyone else?
So it helps people understand how a policy will impact on their everyday lives.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I guess for ensuring the continuation of that kind of contract between the people and government, if you understand what they're doing and you buy into it, you're more likely to vote for them again, or for them to have your trust.
The trust is a key one. It's about the shared purpose, shared understanding. So it is about, I think we're touching on importance of clarity, importance of shared purpose, importance of understanding audiences, for example. So this is a classic Blue Peter style one I've done earlier. So the main that I'd say are why it's important: building relationships, developing strategies, influence, creating movement, among other things. And simply put, getting a message. Shouldn't do that. Getting a message out there and building a story to be followed and to be understood. This was only a tiny just note from me. An example, not to bring back old wounds, but Brexit. So a key one that I always use is Boston in East Midlands. If anyone is from East Midlands or Lincolnshire, no, was the highest leaving voting town in the UK. This is a photo from the Times. It made big headlines back then because I remember there was this BBC report where they went to the market there and all the classic, people taking over our town, etc., etc. Lincolnshire itself was extremely low. So the highest remaining vote in Lincolnshire was 43.1%. But studies showed that a lot of their most prized possessions or developments in recent years, including things like children's centres, business centres, roads, parks, were all developed thanks to €22 million investment from the EU. So that back then, I remember, used to strike me because it was like, why? Why is that the case? Why is there so much money coming in here? And then the headline you use on the other side is the classic Europeans taking our jobs, there's too much immigration, blah, blah. So what has happened here is that Leave had a clear message. The Leave party, Leave side and all of that had a clear message. The EU, on the other hand, absolutely did not. One thing so I grew up in France, like side note from me, and one thing that has always been quite clear in France is anything that's funded by the EU, they shout about it. So these are my two schools. They have flags everywhere, literally. And that they are more pro-European in some respects, but we know when it's been funded by the EU, we know where it comes from. And that was something here that people had no clue. Or if they did have a clue, it didn't matter because the narrative was taken over. Another key current figure that kind of shows this importance of comms and why it's important that we talk about it is, as Laura touched upon earlier, the people who do it quite well are the Conservative Party and the current government. So the Government Communications Service stated in their report this year that communication is the fourth lever of government. So it's on a platform with legislation, taxation, and regulation. So it is the heart. It's at the heart of what they do. This is seen in the fact that they employ 4,500 communication professionals who every day pump out government messaging. They know how key it is. They're using it, and that's how they shape narratives around that aren't necessarily true around the NHS and things like that. Sorry, I've got something about personally. And we were talking about the issues that have gone on in the country and the mixed messaging of the government, etc., over the pandemic. However, they're still ahead in the polls, and they've still managed to come across higher, better. But that's because they've managed to take away or to claim things that weren't necessarily there from them, that were from the NHS. Slight examples. So that's tiny example, but I'll let you guys have a chat about it in a bit, but a tiny example of why it is important. So now we know why, we need to look at how we go about doing this. So you mentioned it earlier, effective communications. I want to bring you guys back in and ask you what you is effective communication. They go very vague.
A clear message.
Yes.
Simple.
Yeah.
Short.
Repeated.
Yeah. It seems straightforward, doesn't it? It's very straightforward, and you have to wonder why if it's that straightforward, why people fail, why we don't do it properly. Once again, what I found earlier. So this is from Apolitical. Again, quite a good resource for different. They do lots of training and things like that. This is their definition. So effective communication is transferring a message that you want to give to the audience, which is intended. And another bit, which is relevant to the example I gave, so effective communication is important in order to minimise the chances of a negative public reaction and also to maximise the chances of compliance with recommended behavioural advice. So this brings in the strategy part of communications, in which the lack of planning is what is often the downfall for many people. So these are the key things, and these are what I want you to remember when we do an activity in a tiny bit. But as a crash course, I'm by no means a professional trainer in comms by any chance, so it's more of a collaboration between us. But to me, these are what I've always been taught, and whatever comms strategy you make are your key things. Messaging, so as you mentioned, exactly what you're trying to say. Clarity, unity, that's it. We could talk for ages about what's wrong in current left's, current Labour politics, current Labour communications, current left politics. It's kind of all over the place still, and there's always people trying to unify, but we're not there yet. Purpose, goal, what are we trying to achieve and what are we trying to get to? First thing of, the first point of any political communication should be, in this case, for example, how are we going to win, what are we going to achieve, how do we get there? That is simple, and we don't usually do that. The key one is audience, so knowing who you're talking to and knowing what they want and what they need. This is something we do at work a lot, and I think a key thing, so there's, I was trying to look at it earlier, so there's, in the most recent Fabian review, there's a really cool article by a person who I'm trying to get on board to do a talk, but he talks about looking forward, not back in Labour, and he talks about one thing that Conservatives managed to do is they managed to make everyone feel like they're involved, whereas Labour, for a while, neglecting half of their population and not talking for a shared purpose, they're not going back to that, so that's a key thing. And then finally, I think you touched upon the trust, is being genuine and knowing that you are someone you can trust. So yeah, does that make sense? Would anyone actually who is the comms professional have anything to add to that?
I just think the number one point should actually be the purpose, goal or objective, and actually having a clear view of, well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing the PR? And then everything connects to that tree from there. Because you can have a great message, but if the message doesn't actually align to the goal, then there's no point having a very, I think Harry mentioned that about having a very, is your name Harry? Yeah. I was like, did I just say the wrong name? Having a very stylish, very well put together by some extraordinary writer message that won't actually hit home with anyone. Yeah.
And one thing to add as well on audience, I think the reason this becomes much more difficult nowadays is people leading busier and busier lives. With an audience, you've got such a small window to get across what you want to get across. I always say to everyone, if Labour could talk to every single voter in the country, we'd win every single election.
Yeah.
We're all very persuasive people. But actually, when you've got such a small window to get your message across to people, you have to make it hit, you have to make it work. It has to have that substance, but also you need to know what you want to get out of that. And it's about getting that short window and you've got the attention.
I think also evaluation, like checking it's actually working.
Yeah, going back and sort of checking what's working and finding out what's not working and troubleshooting. Really.
Being willing to switch it up, I think,
Yeah.
which is something lacking. Brilliant, thanks everyone. What have I put? Oh yeah, as I mentioned, if it's that simple, why do so many fail, and why are we not empowered if we all know what we're doing so much? I mean, there's obviously a bit more to it. But so before we go into the activity, we have Guy here who brilliantly is about to give us kind of the case study version of creating narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we build powerful political narratives? A live case study. So we've had the what and the why, and this is going to try and speak to the how. So I've been involved in sort of local election campaigns and campaigning at all levels since I was about 13, 14. So I've sort of been in this a while, and I've always wanted to sort of take on a campaign myself and run it. So in December 2020, I put myself forward to be the campaigns coordinator in Hertfordshire. And since we knew we were sort of going into lockdown pandemic, we went, well, he's relatively young, he knows how to use a computer and a phone, probably the best option for him. So I did not get the job on merit, more out of sort of pity. But anyway, I took the job as a volunteer, and we had 15 seats to focus on. Every single one of them was Conservative health. So basically, I couldn't really do that badly. All we had to do was gain one or two, and it looked quite good. So we looked at those seats and we went, right, what are we going to do here? And we focused on 4 target seats where we thought the populations, we could speak to those people, we could win over. And those 4 seats comprised of a seat Labour had just lost a year before in a by-election, which we wanted to win back. It comprised of a seat we lost in 2017, which had traditionally been ours. The 3rd seat was a seat we hadn't won in 2 decades, so quite a big ask. And the last one, a seat that we hadn't won in history. So a bit of a mix in terms of our target seats. And I want to talk today just very quickly about one of those seats, Warrenwood South, which is one that has been won 2 decades, as a bit of a case study. So 5 steps to how we sort of cracked our narrative and put it out there. We got quite a good result. So first things first, it's the first thing you always do is you evaluate the situation of the population. So it's that first thing on the previous slide is who are we actually speaking to. So we evaluated this seat, it hadn't been won in 20 years, Last time it had been won was very narrowly in the peak of the Blair years, and we're nowhere near that in terms of the national picture. A 10% Tory lead, and we also had a very good national picture for the Tories, so fighting a real uphill battle. Then we looked at the population. The majority of the population was sort of apathetic, socially conservative working class, a demographic we're really struggling with at the moment. An ageing population, 65 plus, a demographic we're really struggling with at the moment. It had the third highest Jewish population in the country, which sadly, because of the events of the last few years, also a demographic we're really struggling with. So we looked at the population, very difficult, and we're at a crossroads, we sort of struck these restrictions and we don't know what to do. So we decided let's run 2 months of our campaign as a listening campaign, to actually try and find out what people were talking about. So we had 2,000 conversations with voters over the dialogue system the Labour Party has, phone banking them, basically surveying what were your top priorities, what do you have to say to the Labour Party, what's your feedback for us, and then we looked at those responses in terms of demographics and voting intentions. So what were the Conservative voters telling us and what were the key themes? What are the undecided voters telling us and what are the key themes? And here's what we found. So in Boreham South, people had had enough of being ignored, just neglected for decades and decades by the Tories. So we thought, okay, that could be promising for us. The area's being really bad down, people said, potholes, fly tipping, bad services, okay, we have something here. Then it always came back to Labour's just too distant for me to vote. So there are all of these issues, but actually we're too far away from these voters to win them across. So we had to sort of sit down and think, right, how are we going to speak to this population and how are we going to speak to their interests? So we came up with a narrative and we sort of did it on 3 tiers, the very simple up to the very complex. Because you have all sorts of different voters, some like a quick sentence and a quick slogan, some like a detailed policy. So first things first, we decided on some slogans, whereas also referred as buzzwords and bullshit. So we tried to decide some of those. So we looked at the population, we went with the slogan, Labour means work and we're working for you, to try and speak to that sort of working class population. And our candidate there in Boreham South, Richard Butler, we went to back Butler for a better Boreham Wood as our sort of candidate-based slogan. We then had our policies, so talking about current events, one of our main policies was tackle the pothole pandemic. We had create a cleaner, greener community to deal with the sort of the fly tipping and the building on the green belt. And then the third one was build infrastructure first. And each one of those, of course, had a detailed breakdown, because we're not like the Tories, we actually have substance behind what we say. And on the third one, we also tried to create more of a personal narrative to speak about Richard and his qualities. And I've actually asked him if I can talk about this today, so I hope he's not watching. But,
Richard's just joined the chat.
I'm doing hate comments. But yeah, Richard's great. So he's local to the area. He's raising his kids in the area. He's a family man. He's a self-employed gardener. He's run his own successful business. He's had two decades of experience in local politics at every level of local government, parish, town, county, borough. And we sort of looked at all these qualities, and actually, speaking to these voters, we've got some patriotism in there. We've got some family values in there. We've got fiscal responsibility around his business, and we've got experience, and actually all of those categories are speaking to older voters, working class voters. So we're onto something now. But now what we have to do is take that narrative and put it out to people. And this is where, what you were saying about you can have the best narrative in the world, you now need to deliver it. So, and I'm not quite sure how we did this. I mean, people ended up quite unwell, but in 35 days we spoke to 6,000 voters on the doorstep. A lot of caffeine. 1,500 of those voters who were spoken to were specifically in Boreham South, so we talked to quite a bit of the population. And we tried to go onto the doorstep and just speak to the people. So if people didn't have much time, we tried to put the slogans for all the quick ideas. If they had the time, we tried to explain our policies and just speak to and cater to each voter. We also set up a sort of Alistair Campbell-style digital grid with 25 Facebook accounts, pulling messaging in every single day, the repetition, the clarity, being coherent over and over and over again across Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, targeting those messages in on a daily basis. And we got to a point where our network was reaching about 35,000 residents per month after we'd analysed it. We put together election broadcast videos, sort of presidential style, swelling music, slow-mo of the candidate walking down the street. They were seen by 10,000 voters. And then we utilised Facebook's amazing sort of veering on Cambridge Analytica targeted ad system, where you can actually draw out a ward and target exactly what you want to say to certain voters, searching for certain things. And that reached 38,000 voters in Holiday itself. We then obviously had the materials. It's still a very necessary thing in modern politics, especially with an ageing population. So we had our calling cards, our newsletters, our direct addresses, our election materials, we got out to vote cards, putting together all of this sort of materials, the quick slogans on the front, the detail as you folded in and looked into it. back. And we also, at the very last, set up a rebuttals unit, because the key thing about comms is your message can be great, but there's always the potential that it backfires, and you need to be able to troubleshoot that. So we put this unit together of people who weren't doing any of the other campaigning stuff, but could monitor Facebook groups, could monitor online forums. We put this group together, and every time there was an issue, even if it was on the doorstep, people were saying something to us, and we thought actually that could be damaging to our campaign. We took it to the unit, we discussed it, we tried to come up with an effective solution. And that was pretty much what we did. And then step 5 got here is just hope and pray, because we've done all this work, and now all we need is just a little bit of luck on the day. And very proud to announce that on a swing of 7.5%, we then took Bournemouth South back as a Labour seat for the first time in 2 days. And as for the other 3 target seats, the seat we lost in 2020, just the year before, hold its highest Labour vote share since 2011. The seat we lost in 2017 returned to us at an 11.1% swing, and what used to be the Tory bastion of South Mimms Parish Council elected its first ever Labour representative in history. So all in all, it was all right. And in addition to our 4 gays, between the Lib Dems and the Independents, they took a further 7 seats from the Tories. So actually, the Tories walked into these elections with all 15, and then came out with 4. And that, I suppose, is how you build powerful political narrative.
That was amazing. So now, it's your turn. So we're asking quite a lot of you from you for this. But yeah, this is a tiny little thing we're trying to do. So Labour to win in 2024. We've got a room packed of relatively knowledgeable comms people, maybe more knowledgeable by today. So what time is it now? It's 4 o'clock. I'm going to give you guys, if you want to get into groups of like 3 maybe, and in the next 10 minutes so use those 4 things that we talked about and come up with a kind of common plan, or maybe key highlights of what we need to do going forward for 2024. And that's just for context. We are the young Fabians. We have the impact through Labour and comms. We can actually impact things like this. So it's not just one of those exercises like that. It is something that other networks do, and we want to keep doing that. So yeah. Shoot.
I think you guys all vote for
Okay. Right. I don't know if I should pause this.
Probably wise, in case
Shall I
the comments
finish
would be great, and like the other side listening.